Oh, hi. Are you here for the fun question? Me too. The Fun Question, a show where we explore the strange and powerful ways people engage in a life of fun. I'm your host, Dr. David Thomas, the professor of fun, coming to you live from my hidden lair and back for another week of playful exploration. My guest today is, well, me. Uh, Today, you get to hear a little bit about what I do and my background. My area of fun focus is architecture. I have a background, a PhD in architectural history, theory, and criticism, and I choose to use that academic background to actually think about what makes places fun. So today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I think makes architecture fun, but more in particular, what I think makes playful architecture so compelling. So come with me as I get a little academic with you, but mostly try to help open your eyes to the wonderful and joyful world of fun architecture. So what is fun architecture? I don't want to get pedantic or anything. I just think fun architecture is architecture that invites you to play. In a certain sense, it's just the kind of buildings and spaces that immediately put you into a playful frame of mind. When I teach about this subject, one thing I always point to are buildings that have roof lines that come all the way down to pretty close to the ground. You've seen these kind of modernist buildings with these slanted roofs that really just invite you to come up to the roof line and jump on and climb up on the building. Invariably, these kinds of buildings have signs on them that say, please don't climb on the building, because your mind is actually activated by the idea of a roof that you can just get on without a ladder or stairs or anything. It's just right there. It's a kind of a cool inclined plane that you can scamper up. And I find that fascinating because that's really where kind of orthodox or traditional architecture really meets playful architecture. So in that sense, yeah, I want to talk about Disneyland. I want to talk about amusement parks. I want to talk about play places, but really I'm more interested in general of any kind of built environmental form, architecture, if you will, that invites you into a playful mode or mindset. So that's a quick and simple description. And if you think about it, playful architecture could be everything from someone who paints their house in Denver Broncos orange to celebrate their favorite team to someone who adds slides or fire poles or swings on the inside of their house. There's lots and lots of playful touches in architecture. In fact, I had a friend who used to have a house that had a 30-foot rock wall in his house. It came from the basement up a wall into the master bedroom. And it would be fun to go over to his house. You'd end up doing rock climbing. And not surprisingly, one of his children was a nationally ranked rock climber. Again, just putting a playground inside of a house is a form of playful architecture. But outside of that, I'd like to take you maybe on a little bit of a tour of what some of my favorite places are. Now, I study this, so I have lists and lists and lists of playful architecture, architectural form, architectural features. And I don't want to turn this into a class. If you're interested in that, get in touch. We can talk architecture of fun all day long. But I just thought it would be helpful if I were to tell you some of my favorite places I've been, tell you a little bit of like why they're special to me. And then after that, let's get into like kind of how you could enjoy playful architecture a little bit more and really what I think makes this architecture fun. So where do we start? Well, right off the bat, I would start with Disneyland. I'm a big fan of the Disney parks. I always have been. We went the first time to Disney World when I was probably 15 years old, and it just stuck in my memory. It really is a magical place, a magical kingdom. And since been to Disney World many times, Disneyland many times, and I've been to Tokyo Disneyland once. On my bucket list would be to visit the Tokyo or to visit the Shanghai park, and that would be really spectacular. And I also would like to get to Euro Disney or now Disneyland Paris. But what the parks all have in common, at least in my experience, is that they are set outside from ordinary life and they invite you into this kind of fantasy space. Now, I know Disney parks for a lot of people represent maybe kind of a, like a, I don't know, an airbrushed American meritocracy, kind of a nostalgic vision of the past, or maybe at worst, an attempt to reclaim kind of some sort of childlike wonder. And I think it's all of those things too. But more than anything, I think that the Disney parks are beautiful spaces that draw you in and then really allow you to be whoever you are. Now, I know this doesn't sound right because we've been trained on the idea of the Disney adult, people that drank the Disney Kool-Aid, or little kids that have watched The Little Mermaid too many times. But I think that the Disney parks are really, really much deeper than that. Let's just take Disneyland. It was built in the 50s, and it was really, in a certain sense, Walt Disney's attempt to bring the family fun of a merry-go-round, or a small kind of park setting, but update it with really what he saw as movie magic. And so, in a sense, Disneyland became kind of this interesting melding of a traditional American park where you might go for a picnic, combined with the commercialism of the need to sell a Disney show, a Disney program, a Disney movies to get it financed, and then wrapped all that up in truly Disney magic. So as you walk into Disneyland and you go down Main Street, I mean, there is a sort of sense of this kind of manufactured nostalgia, but there's so much going on Main Street. It really is a space designed to take you not really to the streets of yesteryear. The streets of yesteryear were dirty. The sanitary standards of today weren't available. There was horse manure, animals running around. There wasn't air conditioning. There's a lot of things that really wouldn't make sense if you were trying to recreate a nostalgic turn of the century street. Instead, it's the idea of a turn of the century street. It's the idea of taking you out of Anaheim, California, and putting you maybe somewhere in the Midwest. And I love that. I love the fact that it looks like a whole bunch of little shops. It looks like there's a whole bustling enterprise of small businesses and boarding houses, but none of that's really there. If you walk into one store, they're all connected, and you can walk from store to store to store. It's just one continuous, themed gift shop for Disney. But the whole feeling of being somewhere different is great. Now, Walt Disney famously put a castle at the end of Main Street and called it the Weenie. Essentially, it was the thing that would attract your attention and draw you down this fairly mainstream street to then hub out into all the various lands: Tomorrowland, Fantasyland, Adventureland. And even to this day, it really functions well as a hub. You're drawn into this kind of magical environment with a castle. If you think about it, castles are a very unusual thing to have in the United States. There really aren't any actual castles. We've never had a civilized medieval area in the United States or have a reason to build castles. And certainly, even when you build castles, you don't build them like the way Disney did. Disney was riffing off of the Neuschwanstein Castle in southern Germany, which itself was really a set for opera rather than any real military edifice or even meant to be one. It was really, the Neuschwanstein Castle was meant to represent some sort of ideal idea of southern Germany, and then Disneyland becomes the castle as a metaphor for kind of Western fantasy or just fantasy at large. So you're drawn into this castle, and then from there you can choose. And I think that the fact that you choose is really, really important. You can choose to go into the Old West. You can choose to go into the New Orleans sector. You can choose to go into Fantasyland and ride the Pinocchio ride. You can choose to go into Tomorrowland. Anymore, you can also choose to go to Star Wars. You can go to Bantu and experience the wilds of outer space through the lens of the Star Wars universe. Or you can sneak through the Mickey's Toontown and immerse yourself in a cartoon land. I don't mean to give you a full tour of Disneyland. I just really mean to emphasize how much Disney invests in giving its guests space to make their own meaning. I think that that's so important, that it allows you to, gravitate toward thrill rides if you're in the mood for that. It allows you to sit in a quiet cafe and pretend that you're, eating in the New Orleans of turn of the century. It allows you to just dive into the fun of seeing movies you've seen brought to life. Maybe as a parent, it's just a joyful trip to see your kids light up at all the fun stuff. Or maybe it's something that you've been doing for years with your whole family and it's a family event. Maybe it's for a date. when you think about some of the ways people experience Disney, you have all kinds of interesting subcultures that have interacted with the Disney parks. There's famously in Disney World every year Gay Days, where it's a takeover by the LGBT community. There's Dapper Days, where people dress up in their finest wares, finest clothes to go out. There's Goth Days in Disney, where the Goths try to take over Disney. I think this is really indicative of the fact that Disney doesn't really prescribe how you experience the parks as much as the critics say, because it's really wide open. One of my favorites are the gangs of Disney. They're in the LA parks, and people are in gangs, like motorcycle club gangs with denim and leather and colors, and they look kind of menacing until you look at it and you see Scar's army. They're the gang based on Scar from Lion King. There's people from the Haunted Mansion, the Hitchhikers. There's Flynn's Riders, a character from Tangled, if you'll recall. They're kind of allied around him. And these are also family affairs. You may see a whole generations of people in these gangs. And while at first your mind looks at that and says, oh no, they're gangs, the gangs of Disney, they're out for trouble, they're actually just there experiencing the park in the same way that everyone else is. They're there for the fun and the joy and the pleasure and the play of the park. Now, I could go on and on about Disney because, in a certain sense, as a massive global enterprise media company, they have been able to and have heavily invested in this fantasy, or this is not experience, this park where you can go experience things that aren't real but are very real. You can go experience a mountain that's not really there, and that's kind of the fun of there being a mountain in the middle of Anaheim. In the same way that there's a jungle river, in the same way that there's a mining cart ride, in the same way that there's everything in Disney. None of it's quite real, but it's all very tangible and real. They're real plants, they're real people, there's real food set in this completely made up place, and it opens the space up for you to engage and play. So in that sense, I would just say very simply, the reason that Disney attracts me is there's so many interesting things going on, but it is a magical playground. And because of that, I love it. Another one of my favorite places to go is House on the Rock in Wisconsin. If you've never been to House on the Rock, it's kind of extraordinary. I mean, in one sense, it's a tourist trap or a sideshow blown up to epic size. In another sense, it's a collection of collections gone completely to epic scale. In another sense, it's a piece of Americana that's incredibly cool and unique. The story of House on the Rock is that it was built in the 60s by a gentleman who wanted to, make a house, and he built a kind of a Flintstones kind of style bachelor pad on top of this rock chimney, just a big pile of rock. And the house itself is very cool. I mean, there's really nothing quite like it from the architectural history standpoint. We'd probably call it vernacular architecture, but it's natural and exotic and just really something to see. But as people came to see his house on the rock, he started to invest more and more in attractions for the house, and it grew and grew and grew in collection after collection after collection, until now, when I visited, it took us about 4 or 5 hours just to walk through the whole thing. It's just massive. You can think of it, what the Metropolitan Museum of Art is to art, the House on the Rock is to Americana and kitsch. And it's just fantastic. So what's really magical to me about House on the Rock is the collections, by and large, are unlabeled. So one of the first major collections you come across is this long hallway of glass cases that it's a display of firearms. So in one sense, it's a history of firearms. But as you look at the guns in these cases, you start to realize that some of them are just improbable fabrications. They're pistols with a rotating wheel of 30 or 40 barrels. There's guns that have multiple barrels on them. There's guns with knives on them, and some of them you just look at it and you realize if you tried to shoot them, they would probably blow up. They're fantasy weapons mixed in with real weapons. It's just kind of like exotic, but there's so many of them that it's really exciting. One of the exhibits I always point to kind of get people to understand just the staggering scale of this place is there's a circus collection, and it's a big top circus tent. You see it, and it's a 1 inch to one. I think it's 1 inch to one to 2 feet or 3 feet scale. So, a figure is about that tall, a person's about that tall. And, it's a giant tent and and you can look in the tent and you can see circus animals. There's people sitting in the stands, and you can see the roughnecks on the outside working on the tent, and you can see the circus train with the animals. And it's really a fascinating little circus diorama, intimately detailed. And just as you can't hardly get your head around the size of this giant diorama, you realize there's another and another and another. I don't remember how many, but there are multiple circus tents with different circus dioramas, all at a similar scale. And I read that collection alone has 1 million pieces in it. This is just mind boggling. And the museum unfolds over and over again with real and fake, fabricated and collected. And it's really like, to me, my description of it's like walking through the subconscious of America, of American just material culture. And it is fascinating. And I will tell anyone, you really can't describe House on the Rock. You just have to go see it. Now, why do I find this one so enjoyable? Well, I think it's the same as with Disney. It's like, because it's not trying to teach you about history, because it's not trying to teach you about art. In fact, it's pranking on history and art by, here's a machine that says it was a mining machine, but you look at it and it looks like something out of a science fiction movie. It says that this is a collection of rocks, but you have no idea if it's real or if it's fake or if it's made up. There's a wonderful full-scale diorama of, I guess it's like Crusader knights fighting the infidels somewhere in the world. But the Crusaders have an elephant wearing armor, and there's dogs wearing armor, and they're fighting like samurai soldiers. And it doesn't make any sense historically, but it's just wild to look at. So I think by kind of creating all this space around the notion of a museum, it asks questions about authenticity. It asks questions about history. It asks questions about art. It doesn't answer them. It just asks these questions, and then your mind starts to play. And while there's less interactive activities, maybe the way there is at a place like Disney, it's still just something as you walk through it and observe it, your mind kind of boggles. And I think for people that like minimalism or like really nice, clean art museums, you can focus on each piece, this place will make you crazy. But if you like to be visually challenged, intellectually challenged, historically challenged, aesthetically challenged, the House on the Rock is really incredible. And I just get such a kick out of looking at things that don't tell me what they are, but they're interesting to look at. And there's a lot of them, and you have to really make up for your own mind. So again, you kind of get this theme that I'm very big on the idea that the architecture of fun, playful architecture, is definitely architecture that is in the mode of bringing you in and inviting you to play, maybe physically, but just as likely to play intellectually about who are you in this space? What does this mean to you? How do you want to think about it? How do you want to talk about it? What's interesting to you? What's interesting to you and your friends? How do you relate to it? I think that's just fantastic. And so for my third space that I would pick to kind of tell you a little bit about, and just one of my places, I guess in my trifecta of the best of the best in the United States, at least, I would put the City Museum in St. Louis. I was introduced to the City Museum by a friend, and he said he had been in St. Louis, and he said, I went to the City Museum, and he said, I spent like 8 hours there, and I didn't even bring my kids. Now, you got to understand, that was a really indicative statement to me, because the City Museum is often kind of advertised as this giant playground. And it's an old shoe factory, and I think it's maybe 5, 6, 7 stories. And it's just full of stuff, and very much like House on the Rock, it's full of kind of exotic things. And so a lot of it is sculptural. There's cool sculptures that you can look at and explore. There is, if you go to the top, there's a spiral chute. They used to send shoes down, and you can slide down it. One of the most terrifying 20 or 30 seconds of my life, going meow, 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 in a circle around this little pole on a slide. There's a catacombs, like caves. They built this cave system. It's actually kind of dark and disorienting down there. There's a skate park, but there's no skateboards, so you just run around on it with your shoes. There's a kind of an old-fashioned bar in the middle, kind of like, I don't know, a country bar, like a beatnik bar. On the outside of the museum is something that's called monstrosity or monstrosity, if you kind of think about how it's spelled. And it's this giant, like 7 or 6 story jungle gym of salvage. There's a fire engine, there's an airplane, there's little rooms, and it's all connected by these catwalks. And you look at it and it's just extraordinary. And you start to think, how do I get to that little sphere up there? And you're like, oh, well, I can go up the ladder of the fire engine across this catwalk and then climb that ladder, and then I can get into that ball. And it's so spatially it's super interesting, and it challenges you to think about what your body is capable of doing. Um, on the top of the building, there's a whole nother exhibit. There's a Ferris wheel up there, and there's a school bus that's parked, I guess, I don't know, about a third of it sticking out over the building. And you enter the back of the bus from the roof, and then you walk out and you sit in the bus driver's seat. Now you're suspended out in the middle of nowhere. It's really fantastic. I mean, again, it's kind of emphasizing sculpture and interactive activity of kind of like the whole building is kind of a jungle gym where there's no signs that say do not touch. There's certainly no signs that say do not enter. I think the rule of thumb is if you fit, you can go in. And if you get stuck, I'm sorry. It's a great place to go with kids. They can disappear in every little nook and cranny and appear somewhere else. As an adult, it's kind of terrifying that you think if I go in that tube, I may never get out again. And it's aesthetically wonderful. I mean, there's lots of sculptures that have been built out of salvage material. And if there's a theme to the City Museum, it might be salvage. And there's all kinds of interesting architectural artifacts to look at. But mostly, it's just this interactive space where there's stuff and it's set up like a museum, and it's called a museum. But unlike a museum, you can touch everything, you can interact everything, you can climb inside of it, you can climb on top of it, you can kind of ask your questions about, again, what is this, what's it for, what does it mean to me, am I strong enough to climb those monkey bars, am I balanced enough to swing on that rope and jump off of that little thing. The whole place is just completely wonderful. And the fact that it exists at all, I mean, sometimes you think these places were kind of had to be built a certain bit by an outsider, because they don't really adhere to the norms of the museum. They don't adhere to even some of the norms of safety, although I think it's probably perfectly safe, because your brain says, well, if I fall off that, I'm going to get hurt. So I think I won't go up there if I think I'm going to fall off. So you kind of self-regulate a bit. So that's just 3 examples. I mean, there are many, many other places that I love. And in my hometown of Colorado, in Denver, there's Casa Bonita, which is one of the coolest themed restaurants in the world. In Culver City, California, there's the Museum of Jurassic Technology, a museum that plays even more than the City Museum or House on the Rock, with the fine line between what does it mean to exhibit science and art for real or for fun. It's a really wonderful place. There's all kinds of immersive shows. I mean, again, in Denver, and as well as in Santa Fe and Texas and soon to be in California. And in New York City is the Meow Wolf exhibits. They're kind of like art museums crossed with Pee Wee's Playhouse. Beautiful, wonderful, maximalist entertainment and art. So many places, and so many smaller regional parks that are fun. So many just little nooks and niches and locations that really embody what I'm talking about in different ways. So what am I talking about? Well, I was saying the architecture of fun, or playful architecture. You notice I did not really talk about any sort of like, kind of like we'd consider like kind of orthodox or traditional architecture. And that's probably because the way architecture talks about itself is often very much through this lens of kind of authority and beauty. And so you end up with buildings that I think are very playful, like let's just say the Disney Concert Hall, the Frank Gehry building in LA. I mean, it's been theorized to death, and it's a wonderful piece of contemporary architecture or even deconstructed architecture. But I think if you're naive, or you're just you're not like spending time reading crazy architecture theory books, you're going to discover that it's just a fun, playful, interesting, exotic museum. Um, and that's the important thing. Is I think that the architecture of fun has an interesting relationship to broader architecture, because it challenges a lot of the norms around what architecture should be, who should be allowed to design architecture and who gets to talk about architecture. I think because of the reasons I've said, I think that the architecture of fun or playful architecture is architecture at play. And in that sense, it invites the participant, the viewer, the occupant, the user, whatever the relationship of you to that space is, it invites you in to make meaning. And that's my big takeaway. This is what I teach about, what I think about a lot, and this is what I'd like you to think about, is that I think that really, truly playful places invite you in, give you permission to play, and most of all, they invite you to make meaning. And that's not to say that buildings that don't invite you in to make meaning are bad buildings. If you walk into one of the traditional classic cathedrals, the power of them is that they're so overwhelming in their beauty and their structure and in the voice that they speak in. The cathedrals of Europe are masterful pieces of architecture that are trying to teach you something about your relationship to the world, your relationship to the cosmos, your relationship to God, in a way that Disney doesn't care about. Disney wants you to just have fun. It wants you to make your own meaning. The House on the Rock wants you to make your own meaning, decide what it means to you. The City Museum wants you to decide what's important, how you want to interact with it. So that's what we end up with when I think you give yourself the space inside of a building, inside of an environment to make meaning. And to me, that's the nature of what makes architecture fun. So the last thing I would leave you with is like, well, okay, how do you find these places? How do you enjoy them? I think it starts with curiosity. I think in general, if you just ask people, hey, are there any weird buildings in town? They'll tell you, oh, there's a building shaped like a cat, or there's this really cool guy down the street whose house is a 20 or 365 days a year haunted house. You can ask people for weird. Weird people kind of understand weird as not normal architecture. And by and large, that tends to be the playful stuff because it's inviting you in for some sort of a sense to make something playful happen. So I think just asking and learning and being curious is the first and most important thing. I think the second thing is, even when you're in these play places, whether you're in a selfie palace or they're in a museum that's trying to do a playful exhibit, whether you're in a theme park or an amusement park, or whether you've been drug along to Disneyland against your better judgment, I think the important thing is that you should take a moment and ask yourself that question. What does this mean to me? And remember that there's no wrong answers. Now, if you think that Disneyland is a machine that separates fools from their money, or you think about Disneyland as an extremely expensive advertisement for a mass media conglomerate, I guess that's your prerogative. It's your privilege to make that meaning. And, maybe canning on Disney is a kind of play for you. It's kind of a dark play. But I would ask yourself, too, to just lean into the wonder, lean into the childlike feelings where you could be a pirate or a spaceman or a spacewoman, where you could be a jungle boat captain, where you could explore a haunted house or a haunted mine. Give yourself the chance to actually let your mind be at play. Admire the beauty, admire how well constructed it is, but also find the joy in walking down a street where there's music playing, where there's bands walking up and down entertaining you, where there's silly characters that are interacting with you. Enjoy being in a world where there's parades every couple of hours and there's celebration. Enjoy and find the joy and ask yourself, how do I encounter this with a little bit more openness? Because I think that what shuts people down to play in their real life, and absolutely happens when they're in playful environments, and kind of turns off the joy in what I would say is the architecture of fun, is this really simple thing of cynicism, of certainty, of, well, I know what this means, I'm not interested. Back to the cathedrals of Europe. If you're an atheist and you just feel like that all cathedrals represent is royal power and subjugation of our fellow man, I guess you're going to walk into a cathedral and you're just going to see a powerful machine for suppression or oppression. But wouldn't that be selling the cathedral short? Stained glass, the way the light filters in, the kind of sense of just like smallness that it brings to this desire to be connected to something outside of yourself, I don't think you have to be a Catholic to enjoy a cathedral. I think that you can really experience the cathedral as a really amazing construction that human beings put together to ask questions about our place in the universe. And by the same token, I think you can walk into Mickey Mouse's house and have a heck of a time talking to a mouse who's not really a mouse, and a house is not really a house, with a bunch of other people that are wearing little Mickey ears, like, like it's almost like its own religion. But that's a religion that's invited you to make your own meaning in ways that a courthouse, a bank, the DMV, even a hospital don't invite you to make meaning. They kind of invite you to follow the rules. So here's my plea to you. The secret to enjoying the architecture of fun is to find it and then lean in. And by the way, if you find cool stuff, send me an email. I would love to hear from you. I'm always interested in finding new fun places. And the good news is, the list is infinite. The world is full of playful places inviting you to have fun. That's it for this week. Look forward to talking to you soon.